Okay, we are here with Councilmember David Oh. Councilmember, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
So, big news last week, the Special Committee on Child Separation released its report. Can you tell us what the impetus behind that report is and what are some of the key findings?
Well, the impetus around the report was the complaints by mostly mothers that were shocking if true, and very difficult actually to believe. But eventually, through a very long process of one thing and another, I was able to verify that what they were saying was true, and also find out the reasons why. And they mostly center on the fact of people who believe in doing good by not following the rules or following the law. That happens when people believe they have a higher mission and that they could avoid obstructions to that mission if they circumvent the law. And while that may be their intention, it does lead to a lot of bad situations where, in this case, you have a lot of over-reporting of things that should not be reported. Now, that's all very vague, so it's hard for me to summarize that way, so I'll say it this way. Someone misses a doctor's appointment. They have a good reason, but that's recorded as negligence. Someone is a victim of domestic abuse, and when they report it, the police notify DHS, and DHS removes the child from the mother's care. The mother is simply a victim of domestic violence. It would be far better to remove the abuser from her home and keep the child with the mother, but the child is removed and then subject to foster care. And then we begin a whole process of how that mother gets her child back, because a lot of the attitudes have become whether or not that mother is deserving of having her child back. And that's a whole subjective kind of set of trying to prove to someone who thinks you're not worthy. All of this is not a reason to remove a child. I would say it's a violation of the law. And again, we have a system where if you are a mandated reporter, and that's a lot of people. You could be a teacher, you could be a school nurse, you could be a principal, you could be a camp counselor, you could be a coach on a football team or a soccer team. You could be a nurse in a hospital. At any rate, if you do not report something, in hindsight, someone may come back to you and say, 12 months ago, you talked to this child, or you knew of this situation and you didn't report it. Therefore, now you are the subject of an investigation for the violation of, the Child Protective Services Act, which means you can be suspended from your job. You may not be able to teach. You might be taken out of the hospital. And while they are investigating what happened to you, you're unable to work, sometimes without pay. Your employer, for example, a hospital, may want none of that, and therefore, they simply require that you report anything and everything that somebody may later say you should have reported. So if you are a doctor, or if you are a nurse, or if you are a teacher, where is your professional judgment? It's gone. You are now not reporting what you think should be reported. You're reporting anything that might get you in trouble. The problem with that is now you have all this over-reporting. And so in certain cases, the law requires that it be investigated, even if it is anonymous, even if it identifies no reasonable suspicion, which is a legal standard, reasonable suspicion of child abuse. And in most cases, overwhelmingly, like over 85% of the cases, have nothing to do with abuse. They have to do with someone's judgment about whether another person is fit for parenting, or in the case of the DHS workers themselves, or in Philadelphia, Community Umbrella Agency, the CUA workers, that if they don't report it or they don't follow through, they don't remove children, they may themselves be at risk. And so there is too much removing of children for precautionary reasons that end up harming the child, not only causing trauma to the child and their parents, but also subjecting those children to physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. And there's too much of that going on.
And one of the things that the report mentioned is that people are aware of this, and therefore, for instance, women who are in abusive situations are less likely to come forward because they're afraid that their children will be taken away.
Yeah. So what I also found, like, listen, I really was unaware of this. I was raised, I lived in a poor, high crime neighborhood. And despite going to public school there and living under the circumstances there, I went to a magnet high school. I went to a good college. I went to law school. And right there, I am not the likely person to have to ever worry about someone removing my child from school, or taking a child to the hospital and then having a social worker contact DHS and remove my child from my care. So it's just something that I'm just basically oblivious to until I took this job, until I began to get these complaints. But since then, what I found is that the people who are subject to this type of thing, who are mostly poor and Black, mostly, overwhelmingly, are very aware of this and what happens. And so, as you said, someone may be subjected to domestic violence, but doesn't want to report it for fear that something worse would happen. They'll lose their child, and that their child will be subject to harm of all sorts. But it's also true that some people don't want to take their child to a hospital because they don't want to say, like, my child fell out of bed, only to find someone saying, well, we're going to investigate that, and we're removing your 3 children from you until this process ends. Even more so aligned to the social service mission of Department of Human Services, someone is in need of help. I'm living at a friend's house. I'm back home with my mom, living in an apartment over the garage. I just lost my job and I don't have food in the house. They should be able to call with every expectation that they will receive help, not that someone will come out and remove their children from them and now subject them to years of trying to get their children back over the fact they are simply in a hard financial situation. They have help, they have people, but they could use help. So many of the cases originate from someone contacting DHS, or someone's sister or friend contacting DHS as a way of trying to get their friend some help. And then the result is the child or the children have been removed from, the mother, oftentimes a single mother. And then years pass where the child has been moved from foster home to foster home with evidence of physical abuse, neglect, and in cases, sexual abuse. And yet now here is real evidence, whereas a child was removed for none of those reasons, but now there is now evidence of abuse, and the child is still not returned, still passed on from one place to another. So that is a serious problem, and one where I find like it should not be a struggle. A good organization would say, we have a great mission, we have an important mission, we have good people, but we recognize from all these complaints and the evidence, not opinion, evidence that this is true, that we need to go back and put in procedures and and checks and balances and fail safes to make sure that no child is harmed in this manner.
So can you walk us through some of the recommendations for how the reporting process could change?
Well, first, over-reporting is the big problem. And what I mean is, if, as DHS says, more is better, even if you don't have reasonable suspicion, even what they're saying is, if I look at you and I get a funny sense about who you are, or I have a suspicion, though I cannot explain it, I should report it to DHS. And under certain circumstances, like if I report it on Childline for suspected child abuse, they must investigate. And even when they determine that the allegations are unfounded, children are removed and they are placed into foster care and subject to all kinds of things. When they're put in foster care, for example, they're not necessarily in the same school district. They can be put out of county, so now they got a new school to go to. They not surprisingly become depressed, become anxious. Sometimes in several of the cases, without the parents' consent, their children are now being medicated, with, through doctor's orders. As they act out, they are punished. Sometimes there isn't a place to put them, so they are placed in delinquent facilities with juvenile delinquents. These are dependent kids. They've done nothing, to break the law or anything like that. So I one of the first things is reports should articulate what is the basis of reporting. What is the reasonable suspicion that a child is subject to abuse? Not simply that, the parents are poor or somebody just lost their job and they got kicked out of their apartment and they're living over at a friend's house or a cousin's house. Worse than that, Pennsylvania has anonymous reporting, where while it sounds like a good thing, we don't want to reveal the person so we can get a good report. But simply when I say anonymous reporting, the person's identity, of course, is not revealed, but neither is the reason why there's a complaint. And that should be revealed. A person should be told, we received an anonymous complaint that you are beating your child, or whatever the case is. And the reason while we're investigating is this, and this. We do not have a basis of evidence to present reasonable suspicion, but we are required under the state law to follow up, something like that. Or they could say, here is the reasonable suspicion. Here are the grounds. It is also true that for people who are familiar with, they weaponize calling DHS. They do it to attack people, and they can just call anonymously and report 30 times that this person is abusing their child. This person is, and DHS keeps a record of that. It's unfounded. There's no reasonable suspicion. And even in cases where it's proven to be false, they have a record of that as well, under the idea that there are no reports that are unworthwhile, and that there is no false reporting, that somehow if you accumulate enough reports, there is smoke and there must be fire. All of these things are a violation of the law. And so when you're looking for a needle in a haystack, you don't want to keep increasing the size of that haystack. So how it works is that what they're saying is report or else. And so people are reporting and reporting and reporting. And it's like me pulling the fire alarm every time I get a sense there might be a fire, though I have no evidence. That is not good, because you're sending out the fire engine to every false alarm, and yet there are fires where they need to go. And so we end up with the situation where children are removed from perfectly good homes. A lot of expense is spent on this whole process. The parents are subjected to all kinds of problems. But at the same time, we have children that have presented evidence or reasonable suspicion of abuse that never get investigated and are not getting help. So over-reporting is a serious problem. I think also that the registries are another problem because as stated in the report, we have cases where someone is alleged, there's an allegation against a person, and they are put in a child abuse registry. They have not, there's been no process to determine that what the evidence is. And in cases where the child has been returned because the allegations are unfounded, the person remains, unbeknownst to them, on a sexual abuser registry, where when it is found out by their employer or where they try to get another job, they are unable to get that job. And there's no distinction. You may be, for example, listed on a child abuse registry because you were convicted of assaulting a child. Or you may be on that registry because someone put you on there because you couldn't explain why you missed a doctor's appointment. There's no grading, and there should be a differentiation between criminal, serious, not serious, missed an appointment, but made it the next time. In other words, there are also, for example, because it's so vague, when a child misses school, some teachers report it as, child abuse, because they're going to report anything and everything to protect themselves from losing their license or being, removed from teaching or whatever it is. And so those standards have to be made clear. There's also, unfortunately, children who cannot speak for themselves. They're old enough, they're 15, they're 16, but they don't get a chance to speak for themselves. If they were able to make a statement at the very beginning of this case, that may clear out a lot of cases. A lot of cases would be unfounded. The children are saying this never happened, nothing, this statement is false, but they cannot testify. They are not able to testify. They have someone speaking for them. And once again, very unclear whether that person is disagreeing with the child who is able to understand the facts and speak for themselves, whether they will not state what the child wants. I want to go home. And their child advocate says, no, you should be placed in foster care because DHS says so, or whatever it is. Or whether they are stating what the child wants, and may disagree, which is okay. That's a question. Are you acting in the best interest of the child in your professional judgment? Are you representing what the child wants? There has to be more clarity on that. And there has to be a better education to parents, because again, what might not happen to me because I'm informed, knowledgeable person and perceived to be that, versus what happens to someone in the exact same situation who is poorly educated, unemployed, and does not have an ability to contact a lawyer or know their rights. And so, the police give Miranda warnings. You are, the subject of a criminal investigation. You have a right to remain silent. You have a right to an attorney, all those type of things. The response given by DHS is that will impede our work. And I think that reveals a very serious problem. It's the gotcha mentality. Our work is to catch you. You knowing your rights, you being able to make decisions or counsel with an attorney is not something we want to have happen, because we are somehow facilitating harm to children. Whereas by not letting people know what their rights are, by coming into the house when they're not allowed to be there, not informing the parents they have a choice, coming late at night when the courts are closed to say it's an emergency when it's not an emergency, all of those are abusive things that do not lead to good. And so the primary thing that we say is that reforms are needed because it ensures that the law is followed. Number two, reforms are needed because we have proven success. Things in our report are not shocking because this is a problem that has been experienced here in Philadelphia, but across the country. And reforms have been made and proven to be successful, like open courtrooms. If you open up the courtroom, generally the courtroom becomes a better place. People see what's happening, the facilities get better, the level of representation gets better, the advocacy gets better, the parents are able to speak, the children are able to speak, and the results are better. So in many ways, the reforms that we are talking about are proven reforms, certainly agreed to by many experts.
Well, just regarding the courtrooms, and in general, I agree with you, and I think most people would. Just with the case of it being minors,
yes.
Is there any concern there about having the open courtroom?
So, for example, when we look at New York, and they went to open courtrooms, people who are opposed to open courtrooms because we're dealing with minors are not. They have been converted to proponents. What has not happened is the names of juveniles and children are made public in the news and all that type of thing. What has happened is better representation, less harm to children, more intact families, and more accountability. And in the worst cases, children are returned to pedophiles. Children are placed with people that they have identified in children's hospitals as persons who've committed sexual assault against them. So in the worst case scenarios, there is a lack of checks and balances that come from the public. And I believe it was, well, I don't remember what state, but it might have been Rhode Island, but the Supreme Court justice said sunshine is good for children, like casting a light on everything. And so while people originally were concerned, some of them, that having the public come into a courtroom where they're dealing with dependency of juveniles, children, would be harmful, the evidence is that it has been beneficial without the harms, but a improvement in the system.
Okay. And speaking of the court procedure, one of the things that sort of stunned me from the report was that attorneys can be representing both the families and DHS simultaneously. How is that allowed to happen?
So, yeah, that is a problem, right? In other words, I'm not sure how we ended up there. What I can say is that the amount of money that an attorney gets for being a court-appointed representative is minimal. And it may have changed to some extent, but as I recall, and I don't think it's changed much more than this, that an attorney would get like $300 for handling a case for the entire year. Now you consider the cost of parking, gasoline, all that stuff, and it gives reason to believe so many people when they say, I never spoke to my lawyer never showed up, my lawyer showed up, knew nothing about the case, my lawyer showed up, went in court, simply agreed with everything DHS said. That is a huge problem. And so the need to have real legal representation is also one of the reforms that occurred in places like New York City, and a much better circumstance. So I think perhaps because lawyers don't want to do this type of work for the most part, and unfortunately, not all of them, but some of them seem to simply get the check without doing much work. And where they get their work from is from the court. And they may be appointed to cover one issue and another issue. But yeah, it seems as though we have conflicts, and it is throughout the system. It is throughout the system that we find conflicts in the sense that a lawyer is representing what we would normally think of opposing parties.
And one of the things that the report did was made recommendations, not just for local government, but state government as well. Do you think that you and Councilmember Bass, who also participated in this process, will be introducing any legislation soon?
So reason why there are recommendations to the state, to the city, and to the agency is that there are three different jurisdictions, if you will. I'm a city councilman and I can introduce an ordinance or a bill related to city law. However, DHS is an agency that is under the authority of the mayor, who is an executive, but it is also a county entity. In other words, it is subject to state law. And so what it follows is state law. It interprets state law, and then it acts as a county agency. So it's important to get reforms at the state level. That is not something I can do. What I can do is I can send this report and its recommendations to the state Senate, state House, and to the governor's office where it's appropriate. I can send it to the mayor and to DHS and to all related city agencies and departments, and then to each one of my colleagues, and then to start the process of trying to get first state law changed, and if not, doing things that are allowable, by city ordinance. And there are some things that we will not be able to do, but I think the ones that we said we could introduce city ordinances, we can, although we may get resistance from the administration or from DHS itself. So there is also the ability of the executive, be it the governor or the mayor, to do things, many reforms simply because they say so. And that is the power of being an executive. It may not continue on with the next administration, or it may, but I think those are important things. So we have to hold a hearing, which we will soon. We must have a resolution to hold a hearing to adopt the report. The report was in fact approved by our committee, so that should not be a problem. And after it is adopted, then it will be kind of like the official report. But in the meantime, we are busy creating envelopes and printing the report, and we will distribute it. And then I will follow up by contacting the appropriate state legislators and people in Harrisburg to talk with them about, why these reforms are important. And we'll do the same thing here in City Hall.
Okay, and we'll be waiting for that hearing. Changing gears a little bit, what are your thoughts on the budget process and where we are with that?
So as I've said to you before, on and off the air, so to speak, I find the budget process to be very wanting, in the sense that, when people hear budget, they think about like line items and details. We have a very kind of vague process in the city of Philadelphia where the mayor proposes a budget and it passes. However, within that budget is a lot of gray area, or what I would say are misidentified appropriations. And quickly, for example, there may be a department that is in the budget to receive $50 million. But for the last 9 years, after $50 million is appropriated, they come back, the administration, and transfers out $30 million. So the real amount of money that is going to go to that department is 20 million. The 30 million may be used for a variety of other reasons, and they may be important and good reasons, but at the time that the budget is being voted on, I don't know what that $30 million is for. What I can say is, based on the fact that there's no additional hiring, no new mission, no new purchases, and that 9 previous years, $30 million was transferred out and used for other things, I don't believe that $30 million of the 50 is going to be used for what it is purported to be allocated for in the budget. And therefore, I cannot vote for this budget. In other words, budgets are about choices. Are we going to spend $30 million on this? Are we going to spend it on that? What is it? And so I need to know, what is this for? Because maybe I disagree with what the administration is ultimately going to spend it on. Maybe I think there are more important things that it should be spent on. At least I believe that as a elected official on behalf of the people and for the people themselves, they should know what their tax dollars are being allocated for. They may agree or disagree, but it's very vague. You'll find that after we pass a budget at the end of this year, come September, October, the administration is going to come in with transfer ordinances moving $60 or $90 million. Well, that's all from the vague, misidentified things that were passed, where they always intended to move that money out, and obviously for things they don't think the public would approve of. And that is a huge problem for me. So what are we actually funding in the budget? Well, there's things that we know, the money goes to, and those are usually the mundane, kind of like no controversy. You just keep funding L&I to the extent it was funded, fleet to the extent it was funded, the police department to the extent it was funded, and everything else. But in there are some new appropriations, which we can discuss. Maybe I agree, maybe I disagree. Maybe I fight for them, maybe I fight against it. That is as it should be. It's when we have large amounts of money that are not identified and we transfer. That is a problem, because now there is no public discourse on what we're trying to do, what we should be doing, and there's no real knowledge by the public on what the choices are that are being made by the mayor and council members. I think that public, kind of discourse on how do we solve our problems, what are most important problems, I think that's important. So all in all, I follow the budget and I find a lot of it to be misleading, and I try to expose it best I can. And ultimately, I am not really able to expose it, and nor am I satisfied with the budget. And I do think that, baked into the budget are things like tax increases. For example, I believe that, you're estimating that you're going to spend this much money because you're going to increase the real estate tax by X, Y, and Z. Whereas I have introduced a bill to basically reject tax increase based on the fact that we did an independent audit of the assessment methodology, and it was found to be below industry standard, which to me means that when especially poor communities are being overassessed, they're being overtaxed, and they cannot pay their real estate taxes, and they will be subject to sheriff's sale, which is, I think, a thing that has happened in the city and has subjected many people to being displaced for reasons that are not justified. Their property is not worth all that much money. They cannot pay it. And they are then subject to being displaced, being pushed out because the neighborhood is artificially inflated in its cost and its value. And therefore, we end up with very angry people, very upset people, and people who feel the sting of injustice. And in many senses, because they are African American, or they are Hispanic, or they are poor white people, that they are subject to this type of displacement.
So the last thing I'd like to ask you about, Councilmember, we're probably in the best place in terms of the pandemic we've been since it began.
Yes.
Hopefully we're getting very close to the end here. So with that in mind, when we look at the poverty situation in the city, what should the city be doing in order to help get people out of poverty as we move out of the pandemic?
I think the first thing we have to do is make sure people are safe. People cannot go to work. People cannot go to school. People cannot, send their children to school on public transportation, walk down the neighborhood, after school activities. If people are fearful that they're going to get shot or killed or stabbed or robbed, I think it is so important for us to address public safety. We will not get workers wanting to come back to our city. We will not get tourists coming in here to the extent that we need. If we don't get crime under control, make sure our public transportation system is safe and clean. Then it's jobs. We need good jobs. We need the kind of jobs people want. We need jobs that pay well and provide the benefits that people want. Every time we have jobs that do not pay what they should, we have a hard time getting people to take those jobs. We have to deal with the fact that the pandemic has really caused a lot of harm to folks. And there have been some things that have kind of basically stayed off the damage that they are going to endure. But those programs are ending as well. And when we're not careful, again, overspending means that we have less resources for the people who truly need it at the time they need it. And there was a lot of that going on. One of the pervasive problems in this city is education. We have not improved public schools, particularly neighborhood public schools. What we have done is eroded the opportunity that poor children have, poor families have, to get a better level of education. That has been through the deterioration of the selection process in magnet schools. Kids could avoid a poor quality education through the process of applying to magnet schools. And finally, I'd like to say that, one of the most important things we could do in the city that, again, is lacking is we could plan for the future. I think while we have certainly heard important conversations around criminal justice reform, social justice, equality, equity, and things like that, important discussions, what is the future of our city? This pandemic is global. It has disrupted, supply chain, production, manufacturing, all sorts of things around the world. And now, as we're coming out of this pandemic, and we are, certainly here in the United States to a large extent, what is the new pathway to economic growth? What geographic locations, for example, cities like Philadelphia, or cities around the world, what do they offer for people so that people in our neighborhoods and communities can be the best of who they are, and that other people will want to come to Philadelphia to be the best of who they could be? We certainly have universities, we have employment. In some cases, we have a lot of development going on. What I mean is life sciences growing, the Navy Yard, what used to be the Philadelphia Energy Solutions site. We have other things developing which might have a global impact, in terms of shipping going through the Panama Canal up to perhaps the Philadelphia port. That is being expanded. There are investments going on in Philadelphia, but there is also, the need to have good education in our communities, to provide more opportunities for people without a college degree, and things like the creative, innovative economy. So important to that in an age of innovation and intellectual property. So I think without a plan, without some blueprint for what we're going to do, it's hard to fall into place just all by itself. There has to be like an effort, best practices and best ideas put forward. And I think that's something that I find to be missing here in Philadelphia.
Okay. Well, Councilmember David Oh, thank you so much for being with us.
All right. Thank you very much.